Sonic Frontiers is extremely janky, is what I would say if I didn't also think it had some good jank to it. Now what does that mean, you might be asking? Well, since I've completed Sonic Frontiers, which is something that you can check out here if you're interested in the adventure, I finally condensed my ideas to accurately convey my experiences with the game, at least in terms of the Switch port, since that's the version I played on. I know, I like to check out the underdog of the lineup, which wasn't entirely bad, but it still makes me wonder about the status of the development. Like, was it rushed? What parts of the gameplay are functionally good? What parts of the game are fundamentally bad? Who is this gameplay or style of gameplay geared towards? And most important of all, to what extent did Sonic Team accomplish their vision in the gameplay process? Well, to kick off this mini review series, let's break it down specifically with the gameplay, so that you can choose the specific parts of Sonic Frontiers you're actually interested in. So the gameplay itself can be broken down into three basic categories: the open world aspect, cyberspace, and the combat. At least that's how I see it as a person who hasn't played any of the modern Boost titles. Now this is a key aspect to note, since not having these preconceptions about the game can lead to some good things but also some bad. So those who are coming into the franchise might relate. Starting with the open world, Sonic himself on flat ground controls really well, in fact. Very reminiscent of the adventure series, except a lot faster with the enhanced boost. And coupled with the customizability of the controls, dare I say, makes him feel better than the adventure series, at times. Other times he'll actually just fly off the smallest pebble, which didn't exactly hurt my gameplay too badly, but it was funny when it did happen. During other times, Sonic would just collide with certain objects and would behave inconsistently. But then again, I think we tend to forget this occurred in the adventure series as well, where Sonic's collision just tends to stutter around a lot. It could be that Sonic himself is a difficult character to program, as he's constantly moving so fast, which is why I empathize with the lack of, some might say, momentum. I can see why Sonic Team would want to either magnetize Sonic or come to a full stop on a dime, because it gives me, a newcomer, a better grasp of the controls. Where I do have issues with is when there's a lack of consistency through the subjects I've stated previously, like the 2D camera being able to just break segments, Sonic's movement when he climbs horizontally on ledges, certain enemies that take away camera control when you choose not to interact with them, and the list does go on. However, these things didn't detract me from feeling really good when I was rewarded every few minutes with tokens that are actually essential to progress the game. And by the third island, I understood the jankiness of the physics to the point that I actually used it to my advantage in order to skip past taking the rails at one end of the miniature islands. This is kind of what I mean by janky. Once you understand the jank, you have an incredible time in the open world, which, believe me, takes a while for you to understand and did leave me a little burnt out during open world segments. Luckily, we have the dreaded reused asset looking, no momentum playing, bite-sized shortening cyberspace levels. And despite those aspects, I do not care. This stuff is actually euphoric. Coupled with the music and the little camera introductions in certain levels enhances the experience for me. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about the gameplay. Unfortunately, no matter if you're coming from a Boost game or being a rookie like me, it does take some time to get used to. For one, the 3D type stages feel a lot better than the 2D ones. In 2D, Sonic just feels super slow, and it is more evident when going down slopes, considering that the drop dash in this game is absolutely useless in this part. I kept trying to figure out when to use it, but it would just randomly stop at certain times, which acts completely different in the open world. Speaking of which, so does the homing attack, which against enemies in cyberspace completely tanks your speedrun at times, where sometimes in order to get an S rank, you would have to completely ignore these enemies. Overall though, I do think the cyberspace levels that play well are some of the more adventure styled levels, or any levels that take advantage of Sonic's air boost. As weird as it is to note, Sonic controls better in the air than he does on the ground, especially during the wide turns in these boost styled levels. Nonetheless, I thought it was a fun escape when I got burnt out over the overworld, which eventually you will get tired of when you play through a huge session like I did. As for the controls in both categories that I severely disliked is the jumping. I do not know why it is extremely difficult, if not impossible, for Sonic to completely turn around when jumping, which can make platforming or backtracking out of the question. Now, I don't know if this was intentional or not, or if it was because the game physics were catered to the I have never really been good at combat games, but I've always enjoyed the spectacle on how people are able to pull off some amazing combos. Luckily, even though that the combat tree in Sonic Frontiers is fairly simple and easy to achieve, it makes it super fun to chain moves together, and you don't even have to be a pro player to do it. And I'd like to say the lack of complexity works in Sonic's favor, allowing it to be more of a spectacle and simple to grasp. And it's not like there isn't variety in the things to mix it up. These enemies do get diverse and utilize the entire arsenal to its fullest, and aside from certain collisions on some of the guardians and the janky camera angles that some of the enemies take control of, the combat is easily the most fleshed out aspect in the game, which only get better once you reach the titans. It just sucks that I can't go back to them afterwards. See, and that's kind of the problem with the gameplay of Sonic Frontiers. I'm not gonna sit here and say that each aspect doesn't have some inherent flaws, and that it does have lots of fans mixed about how they feel. We do know that the game is partially unfinished, but then does that make it a bad game? Absolutely not, because the foundation of the game is there, and you can see it. You can experience it. Sonic Frontiers was really about the experience, the spectacle of playing as Sonic, not the technical quality of the engine it's running on. Unlike with Forces, no amount of modifying the framework really made the spectacle any better, because the gameplay foundation really wasn't there. And honestly, that's all I cared about, and that's what I mean about jankiness. Sonic Frontiers is good jankiness. But you know what is bad jankiness? I know I said 3 categories, but no matter what category we get into, ultimately the game is a collectathon, and a weird one at that. The puzzles themselves are extremely inconsistent, and the minigames are just questionable. Like, I understand the idea of keeping things simple, but surely something other than running on a treadmill would be better, or just holding to parry, or even having to wait till nightfall just to finish one. Luckily, these only serve to unlock part of the map, but some of the minigames that were needed to accomplish in order to progress, forget about it. It's so unnecessary. You know what I'm talking about. And the biggest offender, in my opinion, is this Starfall event that's supposed to respawn the enemies. You get this event where little sparks are scattered around the island, and when you collect them, you get a little casino royale, which are mostly there in order for you to gain fishing tokens. But this shows up way too often, and the rewards are too lenient that it gets in the way of my gameplay. For those who watched the stream, I was on Rhea Island climbing up the towers, and then this happened when I already had 300 plus tokens. Like, talk about introducing more gambling on an integral part in the story. And then all this leads to the fishing minigame, which I'll admit is a good way to de-tense, but has some rewards that are just blatantly broken. Like purchasing 100 rings when I could just side-loop to spawn some, which also can spawn keys or portal gears randomly, which further detracts from the importance of the guardians or obstacles the rest of the game offers. I know it was probably just added in order to give players an easy way out, especially from this goddamn... Overall, Sonic Frontiers is a good game. An unfinished one, but an oddly fun, janky experience. One that I think anyone looking for a good time will enjoy. And like I said, it's not the most advanced technical game, but the game's foundation just makes you feel good, which at the end of the day is probably the most important aspect to a game. But you know what also feels good? Subscribing to keep up with next video's momentum. It only takes about 2 seconds, and you can always change your mind later. Mr. Bane out.